We call the first book of the Bible Genesis, which means origins. In Hebrew, it's called Bereshith. That's the extent of my Hebrew, that's it. Which means in the beginning. That's how the Hebrews, that's the Jewish nation, that's what they titled the book. The first few words of each book in the Hebrew Bible, that's the way they refer to their books of the Bible. Genesis is not only the beginning book of our Bible, it is also very foundational to our faith. Without the book of Genesis, there's a lot that would be left unanswered or misunderstood for the rest of the Scriptures, including the New Testament in that as well. A lot of what Jesus says takes us back to the very beginning in the book of Genesis. Some of the things that he teaches would not make sense if it were not for the book of Genesis. When we read Genesis, though, we need to understand that it is an ancient document. This goes a little bit with what Scott's talking about on Wednesday nights. Approximately 3,500 years ago, the book of Genesis was penned by Moses. Think about that. We have a document in our hand, 3,500 years old. And we need to take that into account when we begin to read and process and understand and apply the book of Genesis and the things that it contains. It's 3,500 years old, written to a group of people that we know as the Israelites, God's people. And so one thing that we need to understand, although when you say this out loud it doesn't really sound right, it wasn't written to us. It was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. It was written for the Israelite nation 3,500 years ago to speak truth into their lives. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit as we begin to end the lesson after a while. But Genesis is the book of origins, or the book of beginnings. In it we see the origins of the universe. We see the origins of humanity. We see the origin of death and sin. We see the origin of the redemptive promise of things like sacrifice, of the civilizations. We see the beginnings or the origins of languages and nations. And we see the origin of the Messianic promise, the Messiah that would later come into the world through the nation of Israel. Genesis covers the historical period from creation all the way to the days of Joseph while he's in the land of Egypt, and he brings his father and his brothers, his family, to the land to dwell in the land of Goshen there. And then it records his death, and Exodus begins then with his death as well. So tonight we're going to cover Genesis chapter 1, the origins of the beginning of the cosmos, the universe. Everything that when we step out of this building that we can see with our eyes, and the things that we can't see with our eyes. That's what the book, or Genesis chapter 1 has to deal with. Genesis 1, as you well know, describes an extraordinary event. One that if it was not written for us, we would find it hard to believe and even begin to process. And we would have so many questions that would be left unanswered if we did not have Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 31. Genesis 1 is the account of God carefully and thoughtfully creating and ordering the cosmos and filling his earth with his goodness. And it's evident from reading the first chapter of Genesis. And if you haven't read it, well, if you started your daily Bible, you read it just a few days ago. But it's always good to go through it and read it again. You see that God made everything intentionally with purpose. There wasn't an accident. Something didn't pop up or be created on accident. And everything that was created with intention has purpose to it. There's a reason for the things that were created. So let's read verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This verse 1, I believe, is a summary statement of what's about to take place in verses 3 through the rest of the chapter, verse 31. This is a summary statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word heavens and earth, that word heavens, it simply means sky. What you can look up and what you can see. The word earth is not what we necessarily think of as a globe. It just simply means land. It's what we walk on. We go out and we, barefoot, we walk in the grass and the dirt. That's what we swim in, just the land. So God, in the beginning, God created the sky and the land. And that is a figure of speech. Not necessarily, I'm not saying you can't take it literally, but it's a figure of speech of meaning that God made everything above and everything below that we walked on and everything in between. So it's not just saying God only made the sky and the land, but what Moses is saying is God made everything in between. It's a figure of speech that takes the opposites, what's up and what's down, and meaning for the whole. Everything. God made everything. Everything that you can see and everything that you can't see, everything in between land, sky, and everything else. Everything is visible and invisible, and it is by the hand of Paul, he confirms this in Colossians 1 and verse 16. He writes, "For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him." Moses is simply stating everything you can see, God created. Even the things that you can't, God created. You look up at the sky, you see what God created. You look here, the earth you walk on, God created. And everything in between, God created. And then we come to verse 2. "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." I can't tell you exactly what this means, but it seems to be that this is the pre-creation state of the earth. There is something there. It was without form, without void, darkness over the face of the deep. Something was there, but it might be what we might refer to as nothing. It was there, but in its state as it is like this, it was useless. And so sometimes we use the phrase good for nothing. There was something there, but it's useless. It's not useful in the state that it's in. And so it might be referred to as, we might say, as nothing. It's described without form and void, and this means the earth was unordered and uninhabitable. If you've gone and listened since Wednesday night to the Bible Project, Dr. Tim Mackey, a Hebrew scholar, he translates it this way: wild and waste. Wild and waste is the way that the world, I don't know what that actually looks like though, but darkness was over the face of the deep, and the earth was dark and it was chaotic, but there in the midst is the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God was in control, hovering over the face of the deep, in control and about to start taking this chaos and making something ordered and habitable and beautiful and lovely and what we see now. God was in control of this. God was not fighting this chaos to make it do something. As we'll read this minute, God spoke and it what? It happened. So here's the Spirit of God about to address these two problems of unordered and uninhabitable. He's about to take these two problems and solve them in creation. So 6 days of creation. They're very structured. Just a cursory reading, you may not notice it, but as you go back through it again and again and again, you begin to see things pop out. It's very structured and very ordered. Each day begins with, "And God said." Each day. Each day ends this way. "And there was evening, and there was morning." Every day then begins to address these two problems in verse 2 of no order and no inhabitants. And so on days 1 through 3, God brings order to the world. And we'll notice this in just a minute. And then days 4 through 6, God fills the uninhabited world. First he brings order, and then he begins to inhabit what he's brought order to. It's beautiful as you look through this. We're going to go through these 6 days of creation. The first, we're going to notice that God brings order to the chaos there. Day 1, he brings light. Let there be light, and there was light. On day 1, God establishes the order of time and separates the light from the darkness. And it seems to me that God confronts the darkness with himself. He is, if I understand it correctly, he is the light. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 5. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, 15 and 16, speaking of God, he describes it in this way. That he is sovereign, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, who alone has immortality and who dwells in, remember, an approachable light. I believe this light that Moses is writing about is God himself confronting the darkness and dispelling it. And that's what we have. God separates the light from the darkness and orders it, and now has established the realm of time. We come to day 2, and we see that God says, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And so God splits the chaotic waters of verse 2 in half, and he creates the realm of the sky and the sea. He's getting closer to a place that can inhabit life. Day 3, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. So God separates the waters below, and dry land appears. And it's fascinating to me that, I want you to see if you notice this. Throughout the Bible, as you are doing your daily Bible reading, God separates the waters numerous times, and dry land appears. You have it here. You have it with Noah. You have it when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. You have it when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. It happens in a little bit different way in the New Testament. We won't get into that right now. He doesn't create dry land. He brings about new creation. And also, the Spirit seems to be involved in all of those places as well. Quite fascinating. You will look for it. So God separates the waters below, and dry land appears. God has established the realm of the land, the dry ground that we live on. And there's a bonus act of creation in day 3, and God creates vegetation, plants, trees, and all that grows fruit that later will be given to man to eat. And so God says, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. So in days 1 through 3, we have the ordered realms of time, of sky and seas, dry land, and now all the vegetation. So now God has ordered creation, and now he begins to fill creation. And so days 4, 5, and 6 correspond to days 1, 2, and 3. Day 4 corresponds to 1, 5 to 2, and 6 to 3. And it's very interesting. You can almost fold them over into each other and see how God fills these realms that he has now put in the order. Day 4. God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. So God installs the sun, the moon, and the stars. Until now, it seems God himself has been the light, days 1, 2, and 3. But now God has delegated that power to the sun, the moon, and the stars. It seemed he was keeping time, but now the sun, the moon, and the stars. His power has been delegated to them. And they are a reflection of his glory, and they order time. And we come to day 5. God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So now God fills the waters, and now he fills the sky. He ordered them in day 2, and now in day 5, he fills them. He speaks, and this takes place. Day 6 corresponds to day 3. God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, livestock, which would be domesticated animals, creeping things, and beasts, probably wild animals of the earth according to their kind. And now God fills the land. The land brings forth animals. And just like day 3, there's kind of a bonus act of creation. Day 6, there's a bonus act of creation. God creates humanity, or in Hebrew, it's the word Adam. I wonder where Adam got his name. It simply means human. And for some reason, it didn't pop up on day 6. It should. Well, whatever reason it didn't. But he did. He made it on day 6. Just check the text. It's all there. I'm just telling you what's already. And so God gives the plants over to the humans. This is the food to eat. And so God looks over all of his creation and he says it's good. But after making humanity, Adam and Eve, creating them, remember what he says. I think we read it this morning. He says it's very good. God says it's very good. And the importance of humanity is seen in verse 27. Humanity comes from the ground just like all the other creatures, but we are more than just dirt from the ground. Humanity, you and I, man and woman, we are created in the image of God. And he blesses them, he blesses us, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So God confers on man and woman the power or the authority to rule the world through him and subdue it and bring it under subjection. God shares, he delegates his authority to the humans as his royal representatives, if you will, to represent him in the world, to spread the earth, to fill the earth with his goodness. And after day 6, we have a concluding remark. Chapter 2 and verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. Almost corresponding or taking your mind, the reader back to verse 1, almost saying the exact same thing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But there's one more day. It's not a day of creation. It's different. It's outside the pattern of days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It doesn't correspond directly with him. Day 7. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. God stops creating, and he takes up residence in the sacred space of this new cosmos that he has created. But in the text, it seems like that day 7 never ends, because it doesn't follow up with evening and morning, and then there was day 7. Now, I'm not implying that day 7 never ended. I'm not saying it, and I think it did, because we're in day whatever, what it is now. But I think what's happening here, as I think day 7 is God's ideal vision for creation, and looks forward to the eternal rest that Jesus will provide when he returns. Because Hebrews chapter 4 tells us there's a rest that what? Remains. There's a rest that remains. On a side note, a little outside of this, it's interesting to see the author has woven in this concept of number 7 in several different ways in chapter 7. There's more than what I'll share with you. There are 7 days. There are 7 announcements that creation is good. There's 7 Hebrew words in the first verse. 2 times 7 words, 14, in verse 2. The statement about the 7th day has 3 lines of 7 words. The account of creation is beautifully structured. You only see that, though, in the Hebrew. It doesn't really come out in our English text. There's things like that that are lost in translation. Not that necessarily need to be known, but they're just neat, orderly, structured things that you see that God puts in the original text. Absolutely fascinating. Have you ever asked yourself, in reading through Genesis chapter 1 of creation, why? Why did God reveal this? What was the purpose of creation? What is the purpose of the creation narrative? Now here we are, thousands of years removed. Our tendency is to read this through 21st century American eyes. And I think Genesis chapter 1 probably answers some of those questions that we have. But I'm not convinced that Genesis chapter 1 was written to answer those questions, because it was written approximately 3,500 years ago to the nation of Israel. It's hard to say exactly when, but probably when they were wandering in the wilderness, would be my guess. Moses wrote this text approximately 3,500 years ago to a newly liberated Israelite nation as they were wandering in the wilderness looking for rest. Promise them. God is doing more here than revealing to us and to them how the world came into being. The people of Israel had been redeemed from Egypt, a place saturated with pagan mythology and worship, and they were headed and traveling to the land of Canaan, who was saturated with pagan mythology and rituals and worship and things of that nature. And so these two pagan societies, they were full of all kinds of immoral religious rituals and recitations that were said to manipulate the pantheon of gods that they served. If they wanted something, they would go to that God and beg and ask and say things and do things in order to manipulate that God to get what they wanted. That's the way that it worked in Egyptian and Canaanite culture, along with many other horrible and terrible things. But if you think about that, immorality and manipulation, they undermine the biblical understanding of a covenant relationship between God and His people. Because God expects His people to be holy as He is holy. He expects them, He expects us to be different in the way that He is different. Israel had been redeemed politically from slavery in Egypt, and now needed to be redeemed spiritually from the pagan influence. As they come out of Egypt and they stop and camp at Mount Sinai, what's one of the first things that they do? Build us a God. Aaron, show us the God that came out of Israel. He goes, that led us to Israel. Okay, well, give me all your gold. We'll melt it down, and out pops, right? He says, out pops this golden calf. Israel, here's your God. It's the first thing that they did. It was so ingrained in them. This idea of pagan mythology and religion and sacrifice and things like that, it became natural to them. It was one of the very first things that they did after witnessing God parting the sea and destroying their enemies and leading them by a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire and the thunder and the lightning and the smoke that came down on Mount Sinai. Then it's the natural reaction. Let's build a God. Let's create an idol for us. Probably one that they had seen their whole life in the land of Egypt. And they were headed to a place just as bad, if not even more corrupt and immoral than what Egypt was. So Deuteronomy should say 4, not 5. Verse 15 is, Moses, we know, is not going to be able to go into the promised land, but he goes through the law one more time. And he warns them. He says, therefore watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. What does he just describe? Anything that can be found in the act of creation. Don't worship the creation. Don't create an idol out of that, an image. That is part of the creation. I have created that. He says, verse 19, and beware lest you raise your eyes to the heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the hosts of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance as you are this day. God is saying, no human brought you out of the land of Egypt. No animal brought you out of the land of Egypt. The fish didn't do it. The birds of the air didn't do it. The creeping things in the ground didn't do it. The sun, the moon, and the stars, they didn't redeem you. They didn't lead you out of Egypt. He says, I did. The Lord, your God. I did. The one who created all those things. I'm the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Keep reading verse 23. And then he warns them, take care, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make the carved image, the form of anything that the Lord your God has forbidden you. The Lord your God is consuming fire, a jealous God. And before they actually go in, Joshua tells them the same thing. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt and serve the Lord. There is no doubt that the nation of Israel served idols and false gods in Egypt. And God is doing his best to purge their minds and their hearts of this. I believe Moses, by inspiration, penned the creation narrative to destroy these myths and show Israel that they are serving the one personal and benevolent God who is sovereign over the chaos, can create a habitable world and fill it with his goodness and give them rest. Even though they have been slaves, they have been created in the image of the omnipotent and omnibenevolent God who is just, loving, righteous, and faithful to his creation. And he wants to give them rest, a heart and mind of peace that comes through faith in him. Not trusting in the stars and the sun and the moon or animals or idols or a carved image of some kind. Genesis 1, the creation narrative, is designed first to counter ancient and second modern pagan ideas that are destructive to biblical faith. All the things that you can see, they did not redeem Israel. All the things that you can see, they did not save you. The God of heaven who made all those things did that. That is what the creation narrative is about. God created an optimal environment for humanity to thrive in relationship with him. Spiritually, God has created the optimum environment for us to thrive in a spiritual relationship with him. And it's called the church. That's what the creation narrative is about. It points us to the one who made all things. That we will look to him and we will trust in him because he's the one that has redeemed us and brought us out of the slavery of sin. First and foremost, Israelites out of slavery of Egypt. But there's the foreshadowing of what Jesus did for us. Tonight, I know you're here because you believe in the one God that created all things. And none of us would dare say that we have any kind of, none of us have an idol in the corner of our house that we bow down to and worship. But we have plenty of things that we look to and we trust in many times before we do God. And sometimes it starts with ourselves. And we need to purge that out of our hearts and out of our minds and look to the only one who can give us rest. And he's given it here in Jesus, and we're looking forward to the eternal rest that will be given us when he returns. Tonight, if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, He gives you that opportunity every time we meet together. Maybe you're ready for the very first time to put your faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ as Savior. Not yourself, not in anyone else, not in any land, animal, or creeping thing, or bird that flies, or fish that's in the sea, or the sun, moon, and stars, but in Jesus, the Creator. You can do that tonight by repenting of your sins, being immersed in Jesus for the forgiveness of those sins, raised to walk in a new creature, a new creation, recreated in the image of Jesus Himself. And you will be clothed with His righteousness. You're already a child of God. Maybe there are things in your life that you're allowing to separate you. Maybe there are other things in your life that you're looking to trust before you do in your Lord. And you're ready to put that away and make some changes. You can do that tonight. Maybe just some things in your life that you're struggling with, and you want to pray to the church or to encourage you. Or maybe you're looking for a Bible study. Maybe you want to understand who God is, and we'd love to help you with any of those things. We ask you to please come forward and stand while we stand.